Welcome to episode 54 of the Headspace and Timing Podcast, a show brought to you by the Change Your POV Podcast Network. Today's guest, Kacie Kelly, is a program director for the Health and Wellbeing Initiative of the George W. Bush Institute. She is responsible for the Warrior Wellness Alliance, a program that connects organizations providing culturally competent mental health care with organizations providing peer support for veterans in their post-military life.
How do we work with other veterans to encourage them to tell their story and to help them realize that there's so much power in telling your story and talking about challenges, and to help veterans realize that no one, is perfect, and everyone is walking around fighting a battle that no one knows anything about. And I just, I think if there's one thing that we can do through the Warrior Wellness Alliance, I hope that we are able to work with our peer networks and empowering them to reach out for help when they need it.
Welcome to the Change Your POV Podcast Network. You're listening to Headspace and Timing, a show dedicated to breaking down the stereotypes about veteran mental health. My name's Dwayne France, and I'm a combat veteran of both Iraq and Afghanistan. After I retired from the Army, I took on a new mission as a clinical mental health counselor for my fellow service members. If you served in any branch of the military, you're familiar with the M2 machine gun, the 50 cal. It's one of the most effective weapons in the military's arsenal. If the weapon's headspace and timing wasn't set right, however, it was just a huge useless chunk of metal. Veterans can be rendered inoperable if their headspace and timing isn't set correctly either. That's my goal with this show, to change the way that we think and talk about veteran mental health and reduce the stigma against seeking support. Each week, we'll talk with mental health professionals, veterans, and those who support veterans, service members, and their families. We're going to have real and honest conversations about a topic that most just don't like to talk about, veteran mental health. Let's jump into this week's conversation. Hey folks, welcome back to the Headspace and Timing Podcast once again, and as always, we really appreciate you taking the time to listen and to learn more about veteran mental health. As you know, here on the show, we're trying to change the way that we, as veterans, as community, as providers, think and talk about veteran mental health. And I really appreciate you coming along the journey with us. I always say that I'm excited to have the guest on, but again, this guest I really am excited on having on. Kacie Kelly is with the George W. Bush Presidential Center. And even if that weren't enough, just a lot of the stuff that I've learned and had a conversation with Kacie over the last couple of weeks, it's pretty amazing. So, Kacie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dwayne. I'm thrilled to be here and really appreciate all that you've been doing to elevate awareness topics.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a lot of the stuff that even as well, I guess, is widely known, like the Warrior Wellness Alliance and the Bush Presidential Center is in getting this message out. I find that a lot of the veterans that I work with and a lot of my peers in the community aren't familiar with it. And so I'm glad to be able to kind of have a way to get the word out and be able to talk a lot more about what you're doing and what Bush Center is doing. So before we get into that, though, how about you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So as Dwayne said, I recently joined the Bush Institute. I'm about 6 months in as the director of their health and well-being program in the military service initiative there. Before joining the Bush Institute, I served for 15 years in the Department of Veterans Affairs. Most of that experience I describe as helping the system do things differently once we know something works. So, for example, I served at the National Center for PTSD when VA decided to launch the first ever training and dissemination initiative, and that was in cognitive processing therapy. And then later I had the good fortune of working under Secretary McDonald as part of prioritizing public-private partnerships And then my final role in the VA was as the National Director of Public-Private Partnerships in VA's Office of Suicide Prevention. Had some great experiences, met amazing people throughout my VA time, and am really looking forward to continuing to help VA and veterans in my new role at the Bush Institute.
So, and that's really great, even as most recent, I guess, as you've been with the Bush Institute. And again, it does have that connection between sort of the national organizations getting the word out. But your work at the Office of Suicide Prevention, so you were there at the time when the VA released the report, the 2016 report on 2014 veteran suicides. Suicide among veterans and other Americans. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. So in that has been for me as a practitioner and a lot of the awareness that I've been doing. That is one of the most comprehensive reports that I've seen. Of course, we know that's the one that's kind of set the 20 a day as the accurate model. I mean, the earlier 2013 report, I think it was just a sampling, but there's been a lot of information that has come out of that particular report that I think a lot of people are maybe surprised at. Would you be able to talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, sure. That, as you said, that really was the first comprehensive look at the data that we were able to analyze, as a system, VA and otherwise. And I couldn't agree more that report has been helpful, again, both inside VA and thinking about strategies, but I hope also for community organizations. Specifically, that report shown a bright light on the fact that of the veterans who were dying every day, of those 20, 14 of them had not engaged in VA healthcare 2 years leading up to their death. And, as I like to say, VA can't do it alone. If we're really going to crack this nut, we've got to figure out how do we get to those 14, if you will. How do we make sure that we're doing everything we can to connect resources that exist outside of VA walls, and assure that the level of care and connection outside of VA exists as part of building out the ecosystem at large.
No, I absolutely agree. There's, again, as I often say, I work with the VA, not for the VA, because there is a need for community providers, culturally competent community providers, to be able to provide resources for veterans. Of those 14 out of 20, as you mentioned in that statistic, when I saw that, that was it was pretty striking to me. Some of them are not eligible for VA, perhaps either through they make too much money or characterization discharge has gotten a lot of focus over the last 5 or 7 years or so. And then there are those veterans that just simply maybe they think they know what the VA is like, so they don't want to access the VA. But just because they're not accessing the VA doesn't mean that they don't need support.
Correct. There are some people who will never go to the VA, and that's fine. And frankly, I don't know if we as a country want a system in which all veterans go to VA for their care. I think whether you're a veteran or a civilian, having the opportunity to choose where you seek healthcare, I think is important. And I think there are things that VA does really, really well, mental health care being one of them, but there are things that the private sector also does well. And again, we just have to figure out how do we better stratify, how do we better connect dots, how do we better partner in serving those who have served.
Right, and I think that, again, getting back out into the community and community providers, not community mental health providers like myself or agencies that I work with, but even general practitioners in the community. Another striking statistic that I saw from that particular report was the greatest number of deaths in 2014 were veterans age 50 and older, right?
Yeah, I think that's a misconception that is pretty pervasive, that we're trying to break and help people understand that our largest numbers really are white men over the age of 50. Mm-hmm. Now, that report also did highlight that when we look at rates, the rates for post 9/11 veterans and our younger veterans are rising, as well as for women veterans. And so we absolutely need to figure out how do we get ahead of that curve? How do we make sure that we're tackling the overall number of men who are over the age of 50, but also begin to get upstream and start tackling the rates of our younger veterans, so that we can avoid a perfect storm, if you will, down the road.
Sure. And then just even in those three populations that you mentioned, older veterans, I'm the son and nephew of Vietnam veterans, but they may have certain preconceived notions against the VA. As you said, there are some that will never, access services at the VA, and they may be in that older population. They may be the ones that say, the VA didn't help me out in the 90s. Why would it help me out now? The female veterans may very well say that they've gone to the VA, and I've heard this very often, I'm sure you have as well, that they're asked, are you here to take your grandpa to his clinic, or, are you here for your husband? And then the younger veterans think that the VA is for older veterans, right? And so there's all of these just misconceptions, as you said, that are basically keeping everyone from accessing the services that actually help.
Yeah, well, and the thing that one of the things that is keeping my attention, and that we're hoping to tackle as part of our efforts through the Warrior Wellness Alliance at the Bush Institute, is the issue that was recently highlighted in the latest RAND report on community care for veterans. Terry Cornelian was the primary author assessing the capacity of New York State healthcare providers to meet the needs of veterans. And we were really hoping that it was going to demonstrate that community providers were better prepared to serve veterans. And fortunately, the data just isn't demonstrating that. One of the goals of the Bush Institute's Warrior Wellness Alliance is to increase the capacity of quality care in community settings, as part of then helping veterans navigate to quality. We have this ecosystem now where care is highly segmented and completely confusing to the consumer. We don't have a lot of good data about the quality of care in the community. The care in VA and what VA is doing it often is in the headlines, as we all know, but there isn't a lot of opportunity to compare that to care in the community. And so we're hoping to use our platform at the Bush Institute to elevate awareness of that and to influence better investment in quality care.
No, I really appreciate that, and I, as a community provider, I've provided cultural competence training to peers, of course, in my community and things like that. In that, veteran mental health is different than just perhaps standard mental health. I mean, there are unique things that veterans experience that make things more complicated. I've seen in my own personal experience where a provider who doesn't have a lot of familiarity with veterans will automatically think that post-traumatic stress is the primary thing, that is the first issue and the only issue, and that all veterans are traumatized. And without that, like you said, community providers aren't as aware as maybe prepared for that. So how is the Warrior Wellness Alliance helping community providers kind of do that?
Yeah, so one of the ways that we are working through the Warrior Wellness Alliance is to just simply connecting high quality programs and influencing them to collaborate and to coordinate. the overarching goal of the Warrior Wellness Alliance is really to optimize the impact of innovative and high-quality programs that exist across the country and connect to the high-quality peer-to-peer networks that also have been stood up to support post-9/11 veterans. And the goals for the Alliance, we have our traditional clinical side of the house, but we also have this, in aggregate, what amounts to over 1 million post-9/11 veterans that make up the peer network side of the house. And part of how we are hoping to elevate quality care in the community is actually to arm our veterans who make up the peer networks with what to ask for when you are looking for evidence-based mental health care. What does that look like? What does the data show about evidence-based treatments for PTSD or depression or substance use challenges? And then what are also some things that you can be doing that are perhaps more in the lane of health promotion? We know that social connectedness and purpose, having purpose, are protective factors against suicide prevention, as an example. We also know that physical fitness and having some sort of continued mission as part of transition are also important factors. And so we're hoping to leverage the spectrum of care across the Alliance, across the 12 organizations that have come together to make up the Alliance right now, as part of really creating more of a public health type of model related to wellness and well-being.
No, and even that's really great, because a lot of times, and again, in my experience, veterans will come see a mental health professional as a last resort, after an emergency or after a crisis, or they've tried everything else, and it's more of a postvention or sort of a recovery thing, as opposed to an intervention. Something that we perform maintenance on our vehicles and our equipment when we were in the military, but then we don't in many ways do that for our mindset, which is of course really what this blog and the podcast are about, is to be able to provide those resources. But things like partners that you have, the Mission Continues, Student Veterans of America, Team RWB, and Team Rubicon, among others. But they provide a very specific thing to veterans. Of course, Team Rubicon provides meaning and purpose, but they're also hurricane relief. And I've known a lot of veterans that have gone out in that connection to service. Same thing with the Mission Continues. I've seen a lot of veterans that will go through the Mission Continues and then emerge into the nonprofit sector. Of course, Student Veterans of America is educational, Team Red, White, and Blue. So these are all focusing on a different aspect of the veterans' lives. But it's great to hear that, trying to get in and say, oh, by the way, Team RWB, while you're going for a run, did you think about, mental health and psychological health and things like that? And that's sort of a new way of thinking that hasn't really been in place over the last, 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, Dwight, it was one of, when I actually got the call about this job, it was one of the things that was the most exciting to me about the role. And being an innovative strategy. And it was something that we were talking about in my role in VA before I left, is, how do we better utilize these organizations that are doing amazing things at the community level, and how do we do better? How do we better inform them and outreach to them and learn from them? The Warrior Wellness Alliance, I've been just amazed at how much we've already been able to foster this sort of bidirectional communication, and to watch, the researchers and the traditional, psychologists, clinical side of the Alliance just perk up when they have an opportunity to talk with the leaders of Team Red, White, and Blue and the Mission Continues, and vice versa. There has been such a hunger on both sides of the Alliance to really learn from each other and to figure out how they better program around and better refer across the spectrum of care that exists. we stood up the new website at bushcenter.org/WWA for Warrior Wellness Alliance for those who want to check it out as part of really spreading the word, helping other organizations to learn about what the Alliance members are doing and to be able to connect to it. And I'd love for the audience to check it out and provide me with any feedback that you might have about how we can better describe what the individual organizations are doing, as well as how we can better communicate about connection.
Yeah, and I'll definitely make sure that the link to that and all of the other things are in the show notes. That if you're on a run with Team Red, White, and Blue right now and you're listening to this, you can check it out later. But the idea of these organizations, New Age VSOs, but they're providing a need for the veterans. The veteran is looking for something, and they're actually providing an outlet for the veteran that they're maybe looking for, that they lost during transition or they lost out of the military. The transitional aspect of leaving the military, and again, very much in my experience for post 9/11 veterans, it can be challenging because they don't talk about mental health a lot when you're getting out of the Army or the Marine Corps or the Air Force. But it's a foundational aspect of success after the military.
Right, absolutely. So the Alliance really is looking at how to tackle this through the framework of recognize, connect, and deliver. And what we mean by that is how do we leverage the partnerships that exist to enhance awareness of what might be the signs of the invisible wounds of war. How do we then improve the quality that exists? I mentioned that earlier. And then ultimately, how do we increase the numbers of veterans who may be experiencing the invisible wounds of war? How do we increase the numbers of those who are actually connecting to high quality? The other thing that we are getting ready to launch is as part of the Alliance is an integrated data strategy. Like all of these peer networks are collecting some level of information about their members as part of how do they improve or enhance their individual programming. And we're hoping to foster and have committed some resources to looking at that data in aggregate and figuring out where there might be intersections again, across the 1 million post 9/11 veterans that make up these organizations. And then how can we then be more precise about connecting them to the right level of care when they need it?
And I think that's really great. I mean, even sharing that data, a veteran will say, I don't feel well emotionally. I feel maybe disconnected or something. And all I got to go do is go chop down some trees with Team Rubicon. And I'm not, that is not, of course, all that they're doing, and they do some amazing work. But all I need to do is go for a run, and I hook up with Team Red, White, and Blue. Or all I need to do is get a degree, and I go through Student Veterans of America. When that's not always enough, as you said, these veterans with the invisible wounds of war, not just post-traumatic stress, but also, a traumatic brain injury and beyond. But there are some that need more than just what these organizations can support. And I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but these organizations are seeing the same thing. I've had conversations with Team Rubicon representatives here in Colorado that have said, we do this really well, but, some of our veterans are struggling with this over here.
Yeah. The reason, when we were selecting these different types of organizations, one of the things that became apparent to us is that we needed to have a spectrum of resources that exist across the care continuum in an effort to try to tailor the level of care based on needs, if you will, which is why we have a program in the Cohen Veteran Network the system that provides primarily or exclusively outpatient mental health care. They also do a ton of work with families, which is unique. But then in addition to the outpatient mental health care that Cohen provides, we also have a more intensive inpatient intensive outpatient programming that exists across the Warrior Care Network and the Marcus Institute for Brain Health. The reality is that, you see this probably every day more than I do, is that we're trying to create a system of quality for veterans that exists in a larger system of really challenged mental health care across this country. And, my hope is that if we can increase our understanding of how to more precisely prescribe, if you will, the right level of care to meet veterans' needs, that ultimately that will change the landscape of mental health care in this country.
No, I absolutely agree, Kacie. I mean, and I see that on a couple of different levels. Again, on the local level here in Colorado Springs, I worked for quite a bit in the veteran homelessness space before I went to clinical work full time, and we were trying to approach it from the same thing. If we can solve veteran homelessness, we can then extrapolate that into homelessness in general. And so I think in this, and if you can get a veteran to go into therapy, you can almost get anybody to go into therapy. I mean, it's one of those things that not that, well, maybe in this case we are a difficult population, but when I really like that, to say if we can solve this problem, then we can apply what we use to solve this problem to others, and I think that's a great model. I am very much I'm familiar with Cohen Veterans Network. Actually had Anthony Hassan on in one of our earliest podcast back in episode 8, and of course Anthony and I and we've been talking for several years about this idea. Of course, the Marcus Institute is right up the road, like literally from me, about 45 minutes or an hour away in Denver. And so when there's the idea of the social and even peer-to-peer and how important that peer-to-peer is, but then there's a number of veterans that will need that next level care. And I think that's really important. It's good to see that the Warrior Wellness Alliance is built up around that.
Yeah, we recently had a working session of the Alliance members in Boston at the Ether Dome. I'll put a little plug in for MGH for hosting us at the Ether Dome, which is this historic building on the Harvard Med School campus. And it's where they used to do surgeries before there was anesthesia or an ether. And it really set the stage for what I wanted to communicate, which was that the Warrior Wellness Alliance has the opportunity of changing the landscape of healthcare for this country. And we believe that. And we want to do, President Bush and Bush want to do everything in their power to serve those that have served us and to figure out how we do solve this. And they feel incredibly passionate about it. If you haven't noticed, he speaks about this often in speeches, but the book that was released, Portraits of Courage, last spring, is a perfect example of the passion that he really believes about this cause, and the stories that are behind those images are what drives his commitment to the invisible wounds of war and finding solutions for the invisible wounds of war. And all of the go to this program, the Health and Wellbeing Program, and our Military Service Initiative.
So, and I think it's really important, though, to highlight that not all veterans are suffering from the invisible wounds of war. Again, that's when I guess in my experience, I kind of get the sense when I talk about it, it might give the impression that all veterans are struggling with post-traumatic stress or even family concerns or moral injury and these other things that I've talked about before. But that's not actually true. I had Marjorie Morrison from Psych Armor back on episode 53, I think it was. And she was talking about how when she was first working with Marine Corps Marines back in San Diego, that she said that a lot of times some would come in and there wasn't a big issue. There wasn't a challenge, that they maybe just needed somebody to talk with and things were really okay. But by having a larger number of veterans or even service members, in her case, access mental health care, getting used to mental health care, even talking to a mental health professional, that caught a greater number of those veterans that are struggling and connected them with support.
Yeah, we as a if you want to talk about the veteran supporting ecosystem, if you will, we did a really good job of elevating awareness about post-traumatic stress and the invisible wounds, and I think inadvertently sent a message that all veterans were broken, and that's just not reality. In fact, most veterans go back to their communities and become leaders, either in public service or in their employment settings. They outperform their civilian counterparts on almost every metric in academia as well as in employment settings. And so, I now am a little bit more deliberate when I talk about the urgency that I want everyone to feel about being there and supporting those who have served, and also reminding folks that the large majority of veterans are leaders across our country, and we should not underestimate the power of them to lead our country in the future. So I think you're right. I think we as a culture need to do a better job of figuring out how we make sure to spotlight both sides of that story more accurately.
And I don't even think that they're really mutually exclusive. A veteran who has overcome the invisible wounds of war, again, in more than just post-traumatic stress, but sort of the whole gamut, they also, or they are becoming those leaders as well. I mean, it doesn't mean that, if, and as you said, you hesitate to use the word broken or the idea of broken, we're not broken, so I don't fix anything. I'm not a mechanic. The idea of someone that has overcome this and post-traumatic growth can even strengthen the leadership of veterans in our communities.
Yeah, there's actually an eloquent, it's a beautiful piece in Military Times, their new Reboot web publication. It was a piece by Dave Smith. I don't know if it was last week or the week before. Dave Smith happens to be a Team 43 alumni, and so it was flagged for me, but I have read it. I bet I've read it 10 times, and I think about it at least once a day since I read it, because he so beautifully talks about the power of vulnerability and the strength of reaching out for help. And he talks about how he was in a closet with a gun in his mouth, and he ultimately found the courage to reach out for help, and just how liberating that was for him. And, I wish I could bottle that up and figure out how do we work with other veterans to encourage them to tell their story and to help them realize that there's so much power in telling your story and talking about challenges, and to help veterans realize that no one, is perfect, and everyone is walking around fighting a battle that no one knows anything about. And I just, I think if there's one thing that we can do through the Warrior Wellness Alliance, I hope that we are able to work with our peer networks and empowering them to reach out for help when they need it.
No, and I think that's a great example. Maybe Dave's ears are going to be burning, because that's literally who I was just thinking of whenever I said someone who is able to overcome these and become a leader. I just recently, Dave is a colleague of mine. He was actually on the show back in episode 26 talking about stigma with the Veteran Mental Health Boot Camp. But I just saw something recently where he's trying to take a lead in Team Rubicon Norway. Again, in his selected community, even not a U.S. community, but a global community, that he's taking the lead and even doing these kind of things. But you're right, he has been an outspoken advocate for just saying, get it done. just get out in suffering, if that can be the word, in this way is not going to be beneficial. That can actually keep veterans from maybe taking their place as leaders in their community. I have this, and I've written about it before, the idea that veterans of this particular cohort have the ability to be this century's greatest generation. We have the ability to really take the lead over the next 20, 30 years, but we also have the equal danger of becoming the post-World War I lost generation, and there's going to be veterans that are kind of splitting into these two camps. And some of them that are not addressing their concerns, healing from their wounds, and moving on and making a significant impact.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, again, like going back to the Bush Institute's Warrior Wellness Alliance, I think we are uniquely positioned to use the platform that we have in President Bush to facilitate and influence more veterans through the leadership of President Bush. I think it's one thing if a Kacie Kelly makes an ask or makes a suggestion, but when you have your former commander-in-chief asking you to take a step, it's a whole different ballgame. Right?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, and that's maybe it's a different and very admirable use of the bully pulpit, but you're exactly right. This guy in Colorado can be talking whatever he wants, and people are like, yeah, okay, but then not breaking down that stigma. But when President Bush and Mrs. Bush come out and figuratively and even literally, from what I've seen, put their hand on somebody's shoulder and look him in the eye and say, look, get help because we're going to need you for the next 30 years. That's
exactly.
Impactful.
Exactly. And then, I think given where we sit organizationally, we also are able to serve as the honest broker, if you will, of what quality programs look like. And so, if we succeed at empowering veterans to reach out for help when they need it, I think we will also be able to help them navigate through a confusing system of programs that have been stood up over the past 15 years to identify and find those programs that are quality, because we do know that treatment works, right? Like that is the good news. If once you can reach out for help, there are tools in the tool bag that are actually effective. Of course, we need more, but we do have some that are working really well.
No, and I really like that piece too, because even going back to the RAND studies that you quoted, the one about New York that just came out, and then the one several years old about just mental health professionals in general nationwide, that anyone, and I am in an industry where we want to help people. We have big hearts. We're not in this to get rich, right? We want to, and so people will stand up and say, "Oh, I can help a veteran. Oh, I can do this and I can do that." And veteran, come see me. But this work isn't really for the faint of heart. And so someone who's not, as you say, someone who's not familiar or quality or has been vetted in some way might be doing more harm than good. So I appreciate even that aspect, that the National Clearinghouse, not to say in or out. I mean, any organization I think can use these resources, but to say these are the organizations that are doing it the best. Let us help you do it the same way they are.
Right. We think that we are, the Bush Institute is uniquely positioned to identify what the standard should be. We think that we have the convening authority to bring the right subject matter experts together to identify what does quality look like. And when we talk about increasing capacity of quality throughout the country, who is best equipped, or which organizations are best equipped to do the training? How do we utilize technology? And how do we shine a bright light on what good looks like and do more of that? Again, the first time I met President Bush, he said, of course, he was very gracious and said, thank you for being here. And then he said, I don't want us to be another think tank for this Warrior Wellness Alliance. I want us to be a do tank. I want you to figure out what good looks like and go do it. So that's all at the forefront for me is what does good look like, and let's go do more of that.
That's really great, and this is actually something that's been bouncing around in my head most recently. Is the person who has chocolate, they have a lot of value, and the person who has peanut butter has a lot of value, but the person who introduces the two of them combines the value and makes it exponential. And that seems to be, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what the Warrior Wellness Alliance is trying to do. Clinicians, you're doing this great work. Organizations, you're doing this great work. Let's combine and provide exponentially greater work.
Exactly. How do we optimize the great work that's currently out there? How do we reduce duplication of resources and increase effectiveness? Ultimately, connecting more warriors to the right level of care when they need it.
No, I think this is. I knew it would be great as we connected, but this sounds like something that is sorely needed. Look, from a clinician standpoint, where I'm in a community where we have a large number of veterans. Colorado Springs, Colorado is similar, in size perhaps to maybe San Antonio or Norfolk. There are a lot of military service members and veterans in the community, and looking at it from the outside, say not the outside of the Warrior Wellness Alliance, but looking at this, there's a group of us that are trying to say, this is what we need. This is what we need in our country, is someone to come in and say, okay, these are the ones, not to give a stamp of approval, not to give a seal, but to be able to say, this is where you can go to get best practices. Because again, the VA can't do everything. One agency can't do everything. And not all veterans want to access that. So I really want to congratulate you on the work you're doing with the Warrior Wellness Alliance, and say I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. As my boss would say, we are very much in the sausage making of it. We have commitment from all 12 organizations, and we are really figuring out how do we operationalize it at this point. I've been really thankful for some Deloitte consultants. Deloitte gave me 3 FTE on a pro bono basis for the past 8 weeks, with the strict goal of helping me figure out how we operationalize our model and what our business strategy would be and our value proposition, if you will. And I think going into our next alliance meeting in April, we are so much better positioned to be able to make some decisions and begin to start executing on those. For example, one of the things that I mentioned that the Warrior Wellness Alliance is embarking upon is this integrated data strategy. In addition to that, we will be launching in May a voluntary social media database, a data repository. That we talk about post 9/11 veterans as if they're sort of one group, and the reality is there are various subpopulations within our post 9/11 veteran group, and we need to better understand what are they looking for online. What types of organizations are they searching for? Where have we gone wrong in the past in developing programs, and how do we better do that in the future? And so the opt-in social media data repository will be the first of its kind, and will really help us paint a clearer picture of what post 9/11 veterans need and what they want when it comes to health and well-being. And we're thrilled to be launching this later in the spring, and look forward to actually having a clear understanding of how we outreach and how we program around that, what the data tells us.
No, I like that you highlighted that because, as you said, post 9/11 veterans can almost, I'd imagine, span three separate generations. Some of our most senior leaders in 2001 and 2002 were of my father's generation, right? They were who had joined in the mid 60s and have come through. And then, of course, I started deploying halfway through my career, and we have this is unfortunate, but the last veteran of the global war on terror might not have even joined the military yet because of how long we're going on here. And so this is something that is going to span a wide range of individuals, and then even what works with post 9/11 veterans can then be extrapolated into Cold War veterans and Gulf War veterans and that sort of in between service too, and the rising tide lifts all boats. You've got me excited, Kacie. I'll definitely. I mean, and as good as the work is doing, and this is some of my frustration is. I knew of the Bush Center. I knew what it was doing, but not to this level. And I do this for a living. I seek stuff out and things like that. Most veterans don't know this, and so we got to figure out a way to get the information out there wider.
Well, I will be looking back to you once we kick this effort off, and would love your help and anyone's help on the line with elevating awareness about the opportunity related to the social media data work, but also in helping share our website as it represents, the 12 best-in-class organizations that exist. Thank you for putting it on the website. I will also just say it one more time. It's bushcenter.org/WWA. I am thankful for how much goodwill is out there in supporting veterans, and this recognition that everyone can do something. And I want to use the platform of the Warrior Wellness Alliance to help folks figure out what that something is in a real concrete and meaningful way.
No, that's absolutely. You've got somebody. I'll definitely even when this comes out. But if we keep connected and get through all the social networks and the Change Your POV podcast and the Headspace and Timing Network, that will definitely make sure that gets pushed out. Now, if anybody wants to maybe connect with you in order to maybe get a head start on sharing some of this stuff, how can they hear from you, get a hold of you? And communicate their questions?
Sure. Our website is militaryservice@bushcenter.org, and we check that daily. So you can find me or any of my military service initiative colleagues there. And Dwayne, I do also want to just say thank you to you. You are single-handedly changing the conversation about mental health across the veteran landscape. And I so value what you're leading and how we can better utilize technology to have these types of conversations. And I appreciate your efforts to tell your story and to encourage and spotlight for other people the good work that is happening across our country.
Well, I appreciate that too. I kind of joke I have a growing fan club. Now there's my wife, my mom, and you. So there's 3 in my fan club. But no, but I do appreciate that, and I think this is something that think about using new tools in new ways rather than using new tools in old ways. And even much the guys that sort of run this chicken coop, Eddie and Bennett with the Change Your POV podcast, recognizing that there's something about veteran mental health. We need to have a conversation. It can't be something that's secret anymore. It has to be out front, or else we're going to find ourselves split into the lost generation or this century's greatest generation. And I think we all know where I and you and the rest of us want veterans of this this generation, this era to kind of go. So thank you for joining us. Any last thoughts?
I don't think so. I think we've covered it all.
Well, you definitely have a standing invitation. Anytime you or anyone else would like to come on and kind of update or announce anything new, feel free to reach out and we'll have you back on the show.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm going to say yes to that, and then we'll figure out when.
The answer is yes. What is your question? Thank you.
Have a great afternoon.
You're listening to Headspace and Timing on the Change Your POV podcast network. The Warrior Wellness Alliance is a program that's right up my alley. There are many organizations doing great things for veterans, and we featured a few of them on the show. This program is focusing on bringing veteran mental health to the veteran through the organizations they're involved in, like Team Rubicon, Team RWB, and Student Veterans of America. As I mentioned in our discussion, these organizations are doing some great things very well, and mental health professionals can join them. You might have heard my conversation with Alicia Karaquiri on episode 45, talking about the results of the National Academy study that looked at VA mental health care. One of the most striking statistics for me that came out of that study was that nearly half of the 4,000 veterans that took part in it screened positive for a potential mental health condition that impacts their life, their family's life, and their community. Of those half, nearly half of those didn't even perceive that they had a need for mental health treatment. Something wasn't quite right, but they didn't realize it. Of the remaining number, 16% of those that knew there was something not quite right weren't getting help for it. That means only 3 out of 10 veterans who need mental health services were accessing them. More shockingly, 35% of post-9/11 veterans could potentially benefit from mental health counseling services, but are not getting them because they're not aware that they have a problem or they don't want to get help. That's where the peer support programs in the Warrior Wellness Alliance comes in. That 35% that need help but aren't getting it are likely members of the 6 peer networks in the Alliance. Team 43 from the Bush Institute, The Mission Continues, Student Veterans of America, Team RWB, Team Rubicon, and the Wounded Warrior Project. Getting these organizations who are meeting the needs of veterans across the country to understand more about veteran mental health, that's the mission of the Warrior Wellness Alliance. And that's my mission with this blog and podcast, to raise awareness about veteran mental health and connect veterans to the services they need. So now for a couple of announcements. One is directly related to this conversation. In early April, the George W. Bush Institute released the names of the inaugural class of their Stand To Veteran Leadership Initiative, and I'm pleased to announce that I'm one of them. This is an amazing opportunity to take the message that I've been talking about here and work with fellow veteran advocates from across the country to help make a difference in the transition process. You can find more about that program by going to veteranmentalhealth.com/stand2 and follow the link to the complete list of attendees. For 6 months starting in June of 2018, I'll be joining 33 of my colleagues once a month to learn and collaborate in order to make a difference for our brothers and sisters. This selection process was still going on when Kacie and I had this conversation, so neither of us knew about my participation in it. After talking about the Warrior Wellness Alliance, though, I was even more excited about this opportunity. I do have to personally thank Dave Smith, my guest on episode 26, and Danette Patterson, my guest on episode 40, for their personal encouragement and support. And I want to thank you, the listeners of the podcast and the readers of the blog. Your continued encouragement and feedback give me the fuel to keep going. And if that weren't enough, my latest book, Combat Veteran Don't Mean Crazy, has been released on Amazon. I've got a whole list of people to thank for this one, but I really appreciate Dr. Mark Stebnecki, one of my previous podcast guests, for the amazing foreword, and my fellow hosts on the Change Your POV podcast network, Eddie, Bennett, Jeff, and Andrew, for their continued support. The response to the book has been great. I've been getting some good feedback from readers and listeners who are interested in getting a real book in their real hands in real life. If you want to check it out, you can find it on Amazon or through a link in the show notes. I'm going to be giving away some free copies in the upcoming episode, and I've had several longtime listeners and readers ask if I would sign their copy if they send it to me. First, that's kind of strange for me, but okay. Second, if you do pick up a copy and would like for me to do that, drop me a line at dwayne@veteranmentalhealth.com. I'll send you the shipping instructions and all that kind of stuff. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn or message me on Twitter. I'd like to thank the Change Your POV Podcast Network for hosting this show and highlighting the critical importance of veteran mental health. We want to hear from you. You can reach out to me via email at dwayne@veteranmentalhealth.com. You can find me at Twitter at @TheCounselingVet, or head on over to Facebook and look for the Change Your POV Squad. You can find the show notes for this episode and all the episodes by going to veteranmentalhealth.com or changeyourpov.com. Sign up for updates on either or both so you don't miss another episode. While you're at it, check out the other great shows in the Change Your POV podcast network. The show about remembering our military history and reviving our warrior spirit, changing hearts and minds. The show about outdoor activities that us veterans love so much, Neophyte in the Woods. The show that helps us get going at the beginning of the week, Motivation Monday. And Attack Fridays, the show that brings you actionable tips, tricks, and coachable knowledge to help you make the best of your transition. While you're checking out the other shows, drop us a review in iTunes or whatever podcast platform you're listening to. The reviews really help spread the word about what we're doing. If you're looking for the total package for all the information you need to live the life you want after leaving the military, you found it. If you know of a buddy who's looking for the same info, share it with them so they can find it too. I want to thank Doc Todd for his permission to use his track, Not Alone, from his amazing album, Combat Medicine. Doc Todd is somebody who's trying to bring veteran mental health out of the darkness and into the light, and you can get the album by going to therealdoctodd.com. Check it out, because remember, veterans, you're not alone. Ever.
The struggle is real, found a feast and lost a soul. Eventually my drinking, it got out of control. There in darkness I roam, struggling to find home. See, suddenly death didn't feel so alone. 22 a day, destination unknown. It could have been avoided if you picked up the phone, but now you're gone, so I guess all we get is the tone. Nothing but bone weeds, overgrown, pushing up stones. I've triumphed over enemies, co-created enemies. Broke out facilities that tried to put an end to me. R.I.P. I'd rather grind in tranquility. Authentic tendency, embrace my ability.
I try so hard to have faith. I bow my head and I pray. Lord, please lend me the strength to carry on and keep standing. How this life so demanding, so much pain, all this planning. I hurt each time I wait, but with you I'm not alone.
You're not alone.
Yeah. And every time that I fall, I'ma call on you, get myself back up again.
Without my Georgia girls, yeah, I'd probably be dead. Cause I'd be taking every med that the VA said. Gave every shred, every last thread of my identity. Conquer my fragility, eliminate the enemy. Deliver me, God, from temptation. Tell me that this life is just a matrix. Need a facelift, back to basics. Vision LASIX, I only feel alive when I hear the bass kick.
I try so hard to have faith. I bow my head and I pray. Lord, please lend me the strength to carry on and keep standing.
Stand up.
How this life so demanding, so much pain, all this planning. I hurt each time I wait, but with you I'm not alone.
Not alone. You're not alone.
Yeah. And every time that I fall, I'ma call on you, pick myself back up again.
Yeah, just pick up the phone, you're not alone. Just pick up the phone, you're not alone, man. Just pick up the phone, you're not alone. Yeah, pick up the phone, I'm right here. And I love you guys. Take those bottles out, dog, and pour them in the sink. Take the needles out your arm and the gun away from your forehead. It's time, man, you've been through enough pain, stand up. It's time to stand back up. All my veterans, man, Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard. Get up, you know.